The blood on Zane Corvini's hands wasn't his own, and Natasha Russell knew she should run. But she didn't. She stood in the doorway of his office, watching him wipe crimson from his knuckles with a white handkerchief that would never be white again, and felt something break open inside her chest. Not fear. Something older. Something darker. The kind of feeling that makes mice bare their teeth at snakes. The first thing Zane Corvini noticed wasn't the bruises. It was the way Natasha Russell moved through his study that Tuesday morning. Shoulders curved inward like a question mark, her usual fluid grace replaced by something jagged and broken. She kept her left arm pressed against her ribs as she set down his espresso, the sleeve of her uniform riding up just enough to reveal what looked like finger marks. 5 of them, dark purple against her brown skin, shaped like someone had grabbed her hard enough to leave an impression in her bones. Zane didn't say a word. He simply stood, walked to his desk drawer, and pulled out his Beretta M9. The metallic click of the magazine, sliding into place, was the only sound in the room besides Natasha's sharp intake of breath. "Mr. Corvini, address," he said, his voice cold enough to frost the windows. "Give me an address, Natasha." She backed toward the door, her dark eyes wide. "It's nothing. I fell. Please just—" People don't fall and leave handprints on their own arms. He checked the chamber with practiced efficiency, his movements precise and unhurried. "I'm going to ask you one more time, and then I'm going to start making phone calls. When I make phone calls, people disappear. So tell me where to find them, and maybe they'll just end up in a hospital instead." The morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Riverside Drive penthouse caught the tears sliding down her face. In the 3 years Natasha had worked for him, he'd never seen her cry. Not when his associates tracked blood across her freshly mopped floors. Not when they made comments about her body in Italian. Not knowing she spoke the language fluently. Not even when his father, before the cancer took him, had called her every racial slur in his considerable vocabulary. But she was crying now, and something about it made Zane's finger itch against the trigger. "If I tell you," she whispered, "he'll kill me. If you don't tell me, I'll kill him anyway. The difference is you choose how much he suffers first." When Natasha said, next changed everything. "It's your brother," she breathed out. "It's Luca." Before we continue with Natasha's story, can I ask you something? I spend 15 to 20 hours researching, writing, and perfecting each story for you. That's nearly a full week of work to create these cinematic experiences completely free. While you're here enjoying this story, YouTube only shows it to a tiny fraction of people unless you take just 2 seconds to hit subscribe. Here's the thing. If just half of you watching right now subscribed, this channel would explode, and I could create even deeper, more complex stories for you every single week. But only about 3% of viewers are subscribed. That means 97% of you are enjoying hours of content, but haven't taken that tiny step. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for a single click that tells YouTube, show this to more people. So here's my request. If you're enjoying Natasha's story so far, click subscribe. It takes 2 seconds and means everything to this channel's survival. Also, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing this global community we're building. Last video, we had viewers from 47 different countries. Now, let's get back to the story, because what happens next changes everything for Natasha. 6 hours earlier, Natasha had been in her studio apartment in Queens, listening to her boyfriend Brian pack his things. Not boyfriend, ex-boyfriend. The distinction mattered, even if her arms still throbbed where he'd grabbed her during their fight about money, about her job, about the way she let those Italian mobsters disrespect her every day. "Your maid, Tasha," he'd spat, throwing shirts into a duffel bag. "A fucking maid for the family that moves cocaine through half of New York. You got a degree in economics from Columbia, and you're scrubbing toilets for killers." She tried to explain, again, that the job paid 3 times what she'd make at any legitimate firm, that she was saving money, that she had plans. But Brian wasn't listening. He never listened. His hand had snaked out fast, fingers digging into her arm hard enough to make her vision blur. Maybe if you spent less time cooking for your mob boss boyfriend. He's not. And more time acting like you have some self-respect, we wouldn't be in this mess. The mess being the $15,000 Brian had borrowed from a loan shark to fund his investment opportunity that turned out to be a cryptocurrency scam. The mess being the men who showed up at her door looking for payment. The mess being her entire carefully constructed life unraveling like cheap thread. After he left, she'd sat on her bathroom floor for an hour, pressing ice to her arm and telling herself this was temporary. Everything was temporary. She just had to make it through one more year of saving, and she'd have enough to disappear. Maybe Miami, maybe Atlanta, somewhere warm where nobody knew her real last name or why she'd really taken a job with the Corvini family. But that was before Luca Corvini had shown up at her door at 2 in the morning, drunk and demanding to be let in. Before he'd cornered her in her own kitchen and grabbed the same arm Brian had brutalized, his grip lazy but firm, his breath reeking of scotch and violence. "My brother keeps you around like a pet," Luca had slurred, his free hand sliding up her thigh. "But you and me? We could have real fun, Natasha. I'd treat you right. Better than that boyfriend of yours." She'd gone completely still, the survival instinct she'd honed growing up in foster care kicking in. Don't fight. Don't scream. Make yourself small and wait for the predator to get bored. "Luca, you're drunk. Let me call you a car." "Don't want a car." "Want you." His fingers tightened on her arm, right over the existing bruises, and she bit her tongue hard enough to taste copper to keep from crying out. "Come on, baby. One kiss." Zane doesn't have to know. The thing that saved her was his phone ringing. A call from his wife, Caroline, her name flashing on the screen like a rescue flare. Luca had cursed, released her, and stumbled out, leaving her shaking against her refrigerator at 2:30 in the morning. She'd almost called in sick. Almost. But the Corvinis didn't accept sick days without doctor's notes, and she couldn't afford to lose this job. Not yet. Not when she was so close to having enough money saved to execute her real plan. So she put on her uniform, covered the bruises with long sleeves despite the June heat, and taken the subway to Riverside Drive like she did every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. She should have known Zane would notice. The man noticed everything. It was what made him dangerous. "My brother." Zane's voice was flat, emotionless, the gun still in his hand. "You're telling me Luca did this?" Natasha couldn't read his expression, and that terrified her more than the weapon. Zane Corvini was a cipher at the best of times. 34 years old, Harvard-educated, fluent in 5 languages, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting his territory. He'd taken over the family business when his father died 18 months ago, and in that time, he'd doubled their legitimate real estate holdings while cutting their drug operations by 40%. A businessman playing at being a gangster, some of the old guard said. A gangster smart enough to hide behind business, others whispered. Natasha had her own theory. She thought Zane Corvini was tired. Tired of the violence, tired of the legacy, tired of being his father's son. But tired men were still dangerous men, especially when someone touched what they considered theirs. "He was drunk," she said quickly, knowing she was making excuses for a man who didn't deserve them. "He didn't mean. Was it just your arm?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Natasha's silence was answer enough. Zane set the gun on his desk carefully, precisely, the way he did everything. Then he walked to his bar cart, poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a crystal glass, and drank it in one swallow. When he turned back to her, his green eyes were absolutely cold. "Did he rape you, Natasha?" "No." The word came out strangled. "He tried to. He wanted to, but his wife called and he left." "Where were you when this happened?" "My apartment." "He went to Queens." "To your apartment." "At what time?" 2 in the morning. Zane poured another bourbon. Didn't drink it. Just stared at the amber liquid like it held answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. "Why didn't you call me?" The question was so absurd, she almost laughed. "Because you're his brother. Because he's your blood, and I'm just a maid. Because you think I'd choose him over you." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes." "Natasha." He turned to face her fully, and for the first time since she'd started working for him, she saw something crack in his careful composure. "Do you know why I hired you?" She blinked, thrown by the shift. "Because I had good references?" "I hired you because 3 years ago, you walked into an interview at my legitimate consulting firm, using your real credentials. Natasha Du Bois, not Russell. Economics degree from Columbia, summa cum laude. Thesis on money laundering and international banking that was so brilliant it got flagged by the FBI. You picked up the bourbon glass, swirled it, then you disappeared. Changed your name. Took a job as a maid making $30 an hour when you could be pulling six figures at Goldman Sachs. The floor tilted under her feet. He knew. Jesus Christ, he'd known the whole time. Someone like that, Zane continued, someone who intentionally disappears and hides in plain sight while working for a crime family? That's someone running from something, or running towards something. I've spent 3 years trying to figure out which. Natasha's mind raced through the implications. Her carefully constructed cover, the fake ID she'd paid $2,000 for, the social security number that belonged to a real Natasha Russell who died at age 6, all of it worthless. He'd known from day one. Why didn't you say anything? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Because I wanted to see what you'd do. If you were law enforcement, you were patient. If you were running from someone, you were smart. Either way, you were useful. He finally drank the bourbon. And because you make the best espresso in New York, and I'm not a monster. Despite everything, the bruises, the fear, the shock of exposure, she felt a hysterical laugh bubble up. She swallowed it down. What now? Now? Zane picked up his gun again, checked it once more with the casual familiarity of a man who'd been handling weapons since childhood. Now you're going to tell me exactly what my brother did, minute by minute. Then you're going to stay here while I go have a conversation with him. Zane, please. I'm not asking, Natasha. His voice dropped into that register that made grown men flinch. You're under my protection. You have been since the day you started working here, whether you knew it or not. Luca violated that. He came into your home and put his hands on you. That's not a family matter. That's war. He's your brother. She tried again, desperate. Your blood. Caroline is pregnant with their second child. If you do this, if you hurt him, then maybe you should have thought about that before he decided to assault my employee. Zane slid the gun into the holster at his back, then grabbed his phone. Nico, I need you at the penthouse. Yes, now. Bring Marco. We have a family problem. He hung up before Natasha could process what was happening. A family problem. That's what her assault was to him. A problem to be solved with guns and violence, and the kind of brutal efficiency the Corvini family was known for. I don't want anyone to die because of me, she whispered. Zane crossed the room in 3 strides and tilted her chin up with one finger, forcing her to meet his eyes. This close, she could smell his cologne, something expensive and clean that didn't quite mask the scent of gunpowder that clung to all the Corvini men. This close, she could see the fury burning behind his controlled exterior. Listen to me very carefully, he said, his voice soft and absolutely deadly. You're not responsible for the consequences of other people's actions. Luca made a choice. I'm making a choice. But you? You survived. That's all you need to do. Survive and let me handle the rest. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why do you care? I'm nobody. I'm just. You're not nobody to me. The words landed between them like a confession. Natasha's breath caught, and for a moment, she saw past the mob boss, past the calculated violence and the 3-piece suits, to something raw and human underneath. Before she could respond, the elevator chimed, and 2 men stepped into the penthouse. Nico Teresi, Zane's underboss and closest friend, moved with the coiled grace of a street fighter. Marco DeLuca, the family's enforcer, was built like a freight train and twice as mean. Both men took one look at Natasha's tear-stained face and Zane's expression, and their hands moved instinctively toward their weapons. Who? Nico asked simply. Luca, Zane replied. Last night, 2 a.m., he went to Natasha's apartment in Queens. Assaulted her. Tried to rape her. Marco's face went dark. You want us to pick him up? No. I want you to stay here with Natasha. Make sure she's safe. I'll handle Luca personally. Boss, Nico said carefully, you know Caroline will. I don't care what Caroline will do. Zane's voice could have cut glass. My brother put his hands on someone under my protection. That means he answers to me. Natasha watched this exchange with a growing sense of unreality. These men were talking about Zane's own brother, like he was already dead. And maybe he was. Maybe the moment Luca had grabbed her arm, he'd signed his own death warrant. "Don't kill him," she heard herself say. 3 pairs of eyes swiveled to her. "Please. I'm asking you, Zane. Don't kill him." Zane studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once. "I won't kill him, but he'll wish I had." Luca Corvini was having lunch at Maria when his brother walked in. The restaurant went quiet the way restaurants in New York always did when Zane Corvini entered, a ripple of recognition and fear moving through the room like a wave. Luca looked up from his branzino, saw his brother's face, and knew immediately that something had gone very wrong. "Zane, this is a surprise. Caroline and I were just—" "Get up." Zane's voice was conversational, pleasant even, which made it worse. "We're leaving." Caroline Corvini, née Marchesi, daughter of a rival family united through marriage, set down her wine glass with shaking hands. She was 6 months pregnant, glowing with that Madonna-like quality pregnancy sometimes gave women, and smart enough to recognize when her husband was in danger. "Zane, whatever this is about, maybe we could—" "This doesn't concern you, Caroline. But if you're smart, you'll start thinking about whether you want to stay married to a man who assaults women in their own homes." The words hit like bullets. Luca's face went white, then red. "I don't know what lies." Zane moved. 1 second he was standing at the table. The next his hand was fisted in his brother's shirt, hauling him up with shocking strength for a man who spent most of his time behind a desk. Several diners gasped. A waiter dropped a tray. "Natasha Russell doesn't lie," Zane said quietly, his face inches from Luca's. "She also doesn't press charges, apparently. She asked me not to kill you. So you should really thank her because right now I'm very tempted to put a bullet in your spine and watch you learn to walk again." "She's playing you," Luca hissed, struggling in his brother's grip. "She's just a maid, Zane. Why would you believe?" The punch came so fast Luca didn't see it coming. His head snapped back, blood spraying from his nose across the white tablecloth. Caroline screamed. Zane held his brother upright with one hand while the other drew the Beretta from his shoulder holster. "Everyone out," Zane said calmly to the restaurant at large. "Now." They fled. The waiters, the diners, even the chef, all of them scrambling for the exits like rats from a sinking ship. In 30 seconds, the restaurant was empty except for the 3 Corvinis and the sound of Luca's labored breathing. Zane released his brother, letting him collapse into his chair. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to transfer $50,000 into Natasha's account as compensation. You're going to sign a confession I've had drafted detailing exactly what you did. And you're going to leave New York tonight. You can't exile me. Papa would never. Papa's dead. I'm the head of this family now. And my first rule is simple. You don't touch what's mine." Zane set the gun on the table between them. "Natasha has been cleaning our homes, cooking our meals, and keeping our secrets for 3 years. She's earned more loyalty than you've shown in your entire worthless life." Caroline was crying silently, her hands cradling her swollen belly. "Zane, please. Think about your nephew. Think about the family." "I am thinking about the family, which is why Luca gets to leave with his life instead of in a body bag." He turned to his sister-in-law, and his voice softened fractionally. "I'm sorry, Caroline. You deserve better than this. If you want to divorce him, I'll make sure you and the children are taken care of." "Where would I go?" she whispered. "Wherever you want. But you don't have to follow him into exile." Luca lurched to his feet, blood still streaming from his nose. "You're choosing her over me. Over your own blood. For what? Because I got a little rough with the help." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Zane picked up the gun, thumbed off the safety, and pressed it against his brother's kneecap. "Last chance, Luca. Apologize for what you just said, or I pull this trigger and you spend the rest of your life limping." "You won't do it. You're not like Papa. You don't have the balls to." The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Luca screamed, collapsing as his leg gave out, blood blooming across his expensive slacks. Not his kneecap. Zane had shot him in the fleshy part of his thigh, painful but not permanently damaging. Caroline was screaming, scrambling away from the table. Zane stood over his brother with the expression of a man who'd just swatted a fly. "I'm exactly like Papa," he said softly. I'm just better at choosing my targets. You have 6 hours to get out of my city. If I see you after that, I'll finish what I started." He stepped over his brother's writhing form and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Natasha was on her third cup of tea when Zane returned to the penthouse. Marco and Nico had tried to make conversation, but she couldn't focus on anything except the ticking clock and the weight of what she'd set in motion. When the elevator doors opened and Zane stepped out alone, she searched his face for blood, for signs of violence, for any indication of what he'd done. "He's alive," Zane said, reading her expression. "Shot him in the leg. He'll recover, but he won't be walking straight for a few months." "Jesus Christ." She set down her teacup before she dropped it. "You actually shot him. He called you the help. I thought that warranted a bullet." Zane loosened his tie, and she noticed his knuckles were bruised. "He's leaving New York tonight. If he's smart, he'll keep going and never come back." Nico and Marco exchanged glances. "Boss, the Marchesi family will have something to say about you shooting their son-in-law," Nico pointed out. "Let them say it. Caroline witnessed the whole thing. She knows what her husband did." Zane poured himself a drink, his movements mechanical. "If they want war over this, they can have it. But they won't. Nobody wants to go to war over a rapist." The word hung in the air. Rapist. That's what Luca was, what he would have been if his wife hadn't called at exactly the right moment. Natasha felt sick. "I need to go home," she said, standing on shaky legs. "I need to. I can't be here right now." "You're not going back to that apartment." Zane's voice was firm. "Luca knows where you live. Until I'm sure he's actually left the city, you're staying here. I can't stay in your penthouse." "You can, and you will. There's a guest room. It has a lock. Marco will be outside your door all night, and Nico will be monitoring the building." He set down his glass and looked at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Please, Natasha, let me keep you safe." She wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the careful distance she'd kept for 3 years, the professional boundary that had protected her from getting too close to the Corvini family's darkness. But she was tired and scared, and the bruises on her arm throbbed with every heartbeat. "Okay," she whispered. "Just for tonight. Just for tonight." Zane agreed, but they both knew he was lying. The guest room was nicer than her entire apartment. King-size bed, walk-in closet, bathroom with a soaking tub and heated floors. Natasha stood in the doorway, feeling distinctly out of place in her maid's uniform, surrounded by such luxury. "There are clothes in the closet," Zane said from behind her. "My sister stays here sometimes. You're about the same size. Your sister who lives in Milan and definitely isn't the same size as me." But Natasha opened the closet anyway and found an array of designer clothes, all with tags still attached, all exactly her size. She turned to find Zane watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "How long have you been buying me clothes?" she asked quietly. "About 2 years." "Why?" He stepped into the room, and suddenly the cavernous space felt very small. "Because I kept imagining you wearing them. Because I want to give you things that had nothing to do with mops and cleaning supplies. Because I'm selfish and foolish and entirely too obsessed with my maid." Natasha's breath caught. "Zane, I know it's inappropriate. I know there's a power dynamic that makes this complicated. I know you probably don't feel the same way, and this is me taking advantage of a terrible situation." He ran a hand through his dark hair, disheveling it in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "But I shot my own brother today, Natasha. If I'm going to hell for that, I might as well be honest first." She should have backed away, should have maintained the professional distance, reminded him she was his employee, told him this was a bad idea. Instead, she found herself asking, "How long have you felt this way?" "Since you corrected my Italian grammar 6 months into your employment. You were so annoyed that I'd been pronouncing Cavallo wrong, and you just told me." No fear, no deference, just pure academic irritation. A smile ghosted across his face. "I fell a little bit in love with you right then." "That's insane. Most things about me are." They stood there, 2 feet and 1,000 complications between them. Natasha was acutely aware of her uniform, her bruises, the vast gulf between their worlds. But she was also aware of the way Zane looked at her. Not like a maid, not like a possession, but like something precious and rare. I have a confession, too, she heard herself say. My real name is Natasha Dubois. I'm hiding from my stepfather, who's a federal prosecutor in Boston. He's been embezzling from his firm for 15 years, and when I found out and confronted him, he threatened to have me committed. So I ran. Zane listened without interruption as the whole story spilled out. Her mother's death when she was 12, the foster care system, her stepfather, Richard Hartley, who'd fought for custody solely to maintain access to her trust fund, how she discovered his crimes while helping him with his taxes, thinking she was being a good daughter, the threats, the gaslighting, the systematic isolation that had driven her to fake her own death and resurface as someone new. I've been stealing from him, she admitted. Small amounts, routed through offshore accounts using his own money laundering infrastructure. That's why I needed this job. I needed to be invisible while I built my case. In 6 months, I'll have enough evidence to bury him. You've been running an investigation. Zane's voice held something like admiration. While working as a maid. While working as your maid. Learning from the best money launderers in New York. She smiled weakly. You've all been very educational. Jesus, Natasha. He sat down on the bed, processing. You're not a victim. You're a goddamn vigilante. I'm a woman who got tired of being afraid. And your stepfather, does he know where you are? I don't think so. I've been careful. But if he ever found out I was working for you, that I had access to your financial systems. She shuddered. He'd use it against both of us. Zane was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, typed something, and showed her the screen. It was a text to Nico. Asterisk background check on Richard Hartley. Federal prosecutor, Boston. I want everything. Asterisk. What are you doing? Natasha asked. Helping you bury the bastard. You want evidence? I have investigators who can find evidence a federal prosecutor couldn't dream of. You want him destroyed. Zane's smile was sharp enough to cut. Sweetheart, I destroy people for a living. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. He stood, cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone. You spent 3 years protecting yourself alone. Let someone protect you for once. She should have said no. Should have maintained her independence. Finished her plan alone the way she'd started it. But standing there in a room full of clothes he'd bought her, watching this dangerous man offer to wage war on her behalf, Natasha felt something crack open in her chest. Okay, she whispered. Help me. Zane's smile was devastating. There's the woman who corrected my Italian. I was wondering where she went. Over the next 2 weeks, Natasha's life transformed in ways she couldn't have anticipated. She stopped being the maid and started being something else. Zane's consultant, officially. His partner, unofficially. The woman who sat in on business meetings and quietly identified money laundering vulnerabilities in their legitimate businesses. The woman who translated documents from Italian to English with perfect fluency, who suggested corporate restructures that save them millions in taxes, who proved herself so indispensable that even the old guard stopped questioning her presence. And at night, in the privacy of the penthouse, she was simply Natasha, the woman who cooked dinner with Zane, who argued about politics and literature and the ethical implications of organized crime, who fell asleep on his couch during movie nights and woke to find herself covered with a cashmere blanket, who caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. They didn't cross the physical line. Not yet, but the tension built between them like a storm waiting to break. Nico's investigation into Richard Hartley bore fruit faster than expected. Natasha sat in Zane's study one evening, surrounded by folders containing 15 years of embezzlement, fraud, and financial crimes that made her stepfather look like the monster he was. It's more than enough, Nico said, spreading documents across the desk. We could hand this to the FBI tomorrow, and Hartley would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. But Natasha sensed there was more. But he's been using some of that embezzle money to pay off judges. He's got connections. There's a chance he could wriggle out of it if we just dump the evidence and walk away. Nico looked at Zane. We need to be smart about this. Zane leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. What if we didn't go to the FBI? What if we went to the press first? Explain, Natasha said. Prosecutors hate publicity, especially when they're the ones being investigated. If we leak this to the right journalist, someone with a reputation for taking down corrupt officials. Hartley won't be able to bury it. The FBI will have to investigate publicly, transparently. No backroom deals. Natasha felt a smile spreading across her face. You want to destroy him in the court of public opinion before he ever sees a courtroom. I want to make sure he can't hurt you again. Ever. Zane met her eyes. What do you think? She thought about all the years of fear, of hiding, of making herself small. She thought about her mother, who'd loved Richard Hartley and never known what he really was. She thought about the girl she'd been at 12 years old, watching her trust fund disappear into her stepfather's offshore accounts while he smiled and called her his daughter. I think we burn him to the ground, she said. The story broke on a Wednesday. Boston federal prosecutor embezzled $8 million, used funds to bribe judges. The journalist was a Pulitzer winner with a reputation for meticulous research. By Thursday morning, Richard Hartley was in FBI custody. By Friday, he'd been formally charged with enough crimes to keep him in prison for the next 30 years. Natasha watched the news coverage from Zane's penthouse, a glass of wine in her hand and a lightness in her chest she hadn't felt since childhood. How does it feel? Zane asked, sitting beside her on the couch. Like I can breathe again. Good. He took the wine glass from her hand, set it on the table, and turned to face her fully. Natasha, I need to ask you something. Her pulse quickened. Okay. Are you staying because you need protection? Because you feel obligated? Because you're afraid to leave? No. Then why are you staying? She met his eyes, those impossible green eyes that had watched her for 3 years with an intensity she'd pretended not to notice. Because somewhere between correcting your Italian and watching you shoot your brother for me, I fell in love with you. The words hung in the air for a heartbeat. Then Zane kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was 3 years of tension and want and restraint finally breaking, his hands in her hair, her fingers clutching his shirt, both of them desperate and starving and finally allowed to touch. He tasted like bourbon and promises, and when he pulled back to look at her, his expression was reverent. I love you, he said. Completely. Inconveniently. I'll probably get you killed. I'll probably get you arrested. Perfect match then. She laughed against his mouth, and he kissed her again, slower this time, learning the shape of her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Natasha felt like she'd been remade. What happens now, she asked. Now we figure out how a mob boss and an economics genius build a life together. Zane tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. Fair warning, it's going to be complicated. I like complicated. You like impossible. There's a difference. Then it's lucky I'm good at solving impossible problems. 6 months later, Natasha DuBois legally reclaimed her name. She also became the official CFO of Corvini Holdings, the legitimate arm of the family business. Under her guidance, they divested from their remaining illegal operations and focused on real estate development, import, export logistics, and private security. The old guard grumbled. Some of them left. But the family prospered in ways it hadn't in decades, and gradually, grudgingly, they accepted that Zane's maid-turned-strategist knew what she was doing. Luca never returned to New York. Last anyone heard, he was in Vegas, divorced from Caroline and working as a pit boss at a casino. Caroline remarried and had her baby, a girl. Zane was named Godfather, a role he took seriously enough that he showed up to every birthday party with elaborate gifts and genuine affection. And Natasha? She learned to live in the light again. No more hiding, no more fake identities, no more making herself small. She took up space in Zane's world, in his bed, in his heart. She argued with his associates in fluent Italian, restructured their corporate entities to withstand federal scrutiny, and occasionally reminded them all that she'd infiltrated a crime family, taken down a corrupt prosecutor, and survived things that would have broken softer people. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 4 years after the day Zane had first noticed her bruises, Natasha walked into his study with his espresso to find him waiting with a small velvet box. Before you say anything, Zane started, I know this is insane. I know we've only been officially together for 6 months. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is a terrible idea. Zane, but I've loved you for 3 years. I shot my own brother for you. I reorganized my entire criminal empire because you asked me to. At this point, I think we can agree I'm committed. He opened the box. The ring was stunning, an emerald-cut diamond surrounded by smaller stones, elegant and understated and absolutely perfect. Marry me, he said simply. Be my partner in everything. Let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you. Natasha looked at the ring, at this man who'd seen past her disguise to the person underneath, who'd protected her and challenged her and loved her with an intensity that still took her breath away. She thought about the girl she'd been, scrubbing floors and hiding from her own name. She thought about the woman she'd become, fearless and fierce and free. Yes, she said, but only if you promise to keep pronouncing Italian words wrong so I can correct you. I'll mispronounce everything for the rest of my life if it makes you happy. She laughed, and he slid the ring on her finger, and somewhere in the city below, life continued its chaotic dance. But up here, in this penthouse that had become her home, Natasha Dubois, former foster kid, former maid, current CFO, and future Mrs. Corvini, finally had everything she'd never known she wanted. The best part? When Zane kissed her to seal their engagement, he whispered against her lips in purposefully mangled Italian, and she corrected him between kisses, and they both laughed like the future was theirs for the taking. Because it was. And that's how a maid became a queen. If you made it this far, you just experienced 30-plus minutes of pure storytelling. And I need to know, what was your favorite twist? Did you see Natasha's real identity coming? Do you think Zane did the right thing, shooting his own brother? Would you have forgiven Luca? Tell me in the comments right now. And if this story gave you chills, made you angry, or had you rooting for a killer with a conscience, you need to subscribe because next week's story is even more twisted. We're diving into a revenge tale that'll make this one look tame. Hit that like button. It literally costs you nothing, but helps me massively. Share this with someone who loves Mafia romance stories, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, remember, sometimes the most dangerous thing a powerful man can do is fall in love with the right woman. And the most powerful thing a woman can do is let him. Thank you.